Okay, we can get started on our 4 p.m. press conference. Welcome, everybody. This conference is about carbon storage in the Great Plains, and I'd like to introduce Michael McFadden, the AGU president, who is going to introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Peter, and good afternoon. Welcome to the fall AGU meeting. Just as a verbal tweet, this is the largest fall meeting ever, nearly 20,000 abstracts submitted, and what will certainly be, at the end of the day, over 21,000 attendees. It's my pleasure to be introducing the speakers at this press conference: David Hayes, the Deputy Secretary of the Interior, and Marcia McNutt, who is the Director of the U.S. Geological Survey, and who not so long ago was in my role as AGU President, and who, incidentally, was also a graduate student colleague of mine at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography many years ago. Well, that's true. Early 90s. Deputy Secretary Hayes is the second highest ranking official at the Department of the Interior and has authority over all the department's bureaus and agencies. He's also involved in implementing the Secretary's priorities for the department, which include promoting conservation initiatives, encouraging renewable energy development on public lands and offshore, and developing conventional energy resources safely and responsibly. Deputy Secretary Hayes received his law degree from Stanford University, where he was editor of the Stanford Law Review, and he will be joining us by phone. Marcia McNutt is the first woman director of the USGS in its 130-year history. She previously headed the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute at Moss Landing, California, and was president of AGU 2000 to 2002. Dr. McNutt's scientific research has included studies of the ocean, studies of ocean island volcanism, continental breakup in the western U.S., and uplift of the Tibetan Plateau. She earned her PhD in Earth Sciences from the Scripps Institution of Oceanography in La Jolla, California. Zhiliang Zhu, USGS research scientist, is project chief of the USGS National Assessment on Biological Carbon Sequestration. He received his PhD in forestry from the University of Michigan. So, our panelists, thank you.
And this is Peter Weiss again for 1 second. I just wanted to add, which I forgot, that there are copies of the report and press release on the back table.
So should I jump in here?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the introduction. This is David Hayes, Deputy Secretary of the Interior. I'm calling in here from Washington. And I know that my Juris Doctor does not stand up to the real doctorates at the gathering here. But I am excited to participate in today's announcement and the rollout of this Great Plains study. I would just like to take a couple of minutes and put this into context and explain why, from Secretary Salazar and my and Marcia's perspective, this is such an important development and part of an exciting series of upcoming developments that are emerging from some terrific work from the United States Geological Survey. This started with the passage in 2007 of the Energy Act, which included, among many other important provisions, a perhaps little recognized in its importance provision that charged the United States Geological Survey with the task of identifying biological carbon sequestration storage capability in the United States, and that asked the USGS to also, in addition to identifying how much carbon is absorbed in our landscapes and different land types, to project ahead what possibilities there might be for land use changes that could potentially increase or decrease carbon sequestration in our landscapes. When we came into office with the President, work had really not begun on this initiative. The President and Secretary Salazar recognized the importance of biological sequestration and understanding better how much carbon is absorbed in our landscapes as part of our attention more generally to the climate change challenge that we all face. And as a policy matter, we recognize the importance of number one, educating Americans about how much carbon is absorbed in our landscapes, and potentially providing tools to policymakers at all levels and decision makers at all levels to make good decisions about land use going forward, with the ability to take into account the carbon implications of those decisions. This was a daunting task to take this on because of the complexity of the effort, but the USGS team took it on, and first, of course, developed the methodology that we released in 2010. Dr. McNutt and I and the Secretary were actually in Copenhagen in the climate summit when we released the methodology that had been developed by the USGS. And now we roll out the first of the next steps in this process, to me the most exciting next steps, because today we look at the results of the USGS analysis of carbon sequestration in one region of the country, the Great Plains. This is the first of what will now be a series of analyses in different regions of the country that will be coming out seriatim as we proceed through the congressionally mandated study protocol that the USGS is implementing. The reason why this is so significant is that we are now learning with much more precision and scientific integrity how much carbon is absorbed in the different land uses in the Great Plains. We are now able to understand how important to the carbon cycle land sequestration is, and the press release provides some statistics in that regard, some amazing statistics about how the Great Plains alone can account for something like 20% of the emissions of all transportation carbon that is released in the United States. And it gives some sense of how important in the carbon cycle biological sequestration is. The report also provides information that folks will want to delve into that give context here about the land uses that hold the most promise for additional carbon sequestration. As we search for ways to help balance the carbon cycle, this is going to be an important tool. So we're excited about the scientific work that's gone into this release. We are looking forward to the regional reports that will follow, and we will be looking to use this tool and provide it for decision makers at all levels as they look for opportunities for how conservation, restoration, and other land use activities can help promote the carbon cycle. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. McNutt.
Okay. Thank you very much, David, and thank you very much for all of you who are assembled today for the rollout of this important report. I'd like to start my remarks taking you all back 40 years. And the event 40 years I want to talk about was the launch of the Landsat series of satellites. Landsat is a program which the USGS has proudly been part of since its inception. And Landsat has provided this nation, and actually the entire world, with an unprecedented and unbroken record of land use change and climate change on the Earth's surface. And during that 40 years, we've been able to look at the hand of man and the hand of nature and how it has changed the surface of this earth through decisions we've made as to how our cities have grown, how we've cut down forests, how we've taken grasslands and turned them into agricultural lands, how we've taken agricultural lands and turned them back into forests, other decisions we've made. We've also seen how glaciers have retreated. We've seen how shorelines have eroded due to the pounding of the ocean. We've seen the effect of natural hazards, such as Katrina. We've seen the effect of droughts. We've seen the effect of wildfires. We've seen the effect of floods. We've seen the effect of Katrina and what's been left in her wake. And through all of this, it's been mostly a set of pictures. A set of pictures that we've been able to use mostly in a qualitative way to say something about how the effect of man and the effect of nature have changed the face of this earth. But today, thanks to the efforts of some fabulous scientists at the USGS, we now have a quantitative way to start relating the effect of climate, land use decisions, and natural hazards, and put them all together in this carbon cycle, and put them in a way that we can now start putting into our own hands our future, and make land use change decisions that can ideally sequester carbon and hopefully offset some of the worst impacts of climate in the future, and put the future in our own hands because of the power that science gives us through this report. Now, the Great Plains, this may be only one region, but it's a really big and really diverse region. It includes areas like southern Minnesota, where I grew up, a region that's full of duck hunting and lots of lakes and lots of agricultural area. It also includes the Front Range of the Colorado, where I went to school in Colorado College. It also includes the Flint Hills of Kansas, where I recently went riding with Governor Brownback of Kansas, the last 1% of what used to be the tallgrass prairie, and where the ranchers there really get it in terms of what they want to do to save the last part of this gorgeous ecosystem, and one that's very important in terms of carbon sequestration and a very complex ecosystem. So don't be confused that just because this is one region, it is one ecosystem. The amount of science and the amount of study that went into try to understand the complex ecoregions here is a true tour de force. And I really have to congratulate the scientists and the amount of work and the amount of study that they did. Now, for those of you who will dig into this report, you will see that there's still a lot of uncertainty, a lot of error bars, a lot of differing predictions as to what the future holds. And a lot of that uncertainty is the natural uncertainty because we don't necessarily have all the scientific answers yet. And a lot of the uncertainty is because of decisions that we haven't yet made and that are still within our control to change our minds on. And I hope that we will make good decisions in what we decide to do in the future. And I hope that in the future we will also be able to answer those scientific questions so that when future versions of this report come out, we can narrow those error bars and understand more about the carbon cycle and more about the science, so that science and understanding will continually improve as we go forward with these reports. So again, I want to congratulate the scientists for what they've done. I feel really that this is a really important step forward, and that this is a marriage of a 40-year record and science, and that this is seeing what I believe was the vision for what Landsat could achieve when it was first launched in terms of providing information to really make people make the right decisions. So thank you all very much, and I'll turn this over to Dr. Z, the leader of this study.
Hello. So Dr. Zhu will be able to answer questions from the floor and from the phone. So does anyone like to start? Would you like to maybe summarize the report a little bit to get things started and see if people would like to ask some questions? Do we have a question from the phone?
I'll be happy to. Well, this report represents a major delivery of USGS science. I don't know why the Congress originally selected the USGS to conduct this assessment, but the fact that the original requirement is to cover all ecosystems and all major ecological processes perhaps testify to the overall comprehensive scientific strength for this agency. For this particular regional assessment, we covered all major ecological systems. This includes forests, grasslands, shrublands, wetlands, croplands, and aquatic systems. Put them all together to look at their intersections, interactions, and the processes that control the fate of carbon among those ecosystems. Those include the natural disturbances such as fire, such as sedimentation, transport out of river systems, such as grazing and land management activities. This being in Great Plains, a lot of agricultural management activities. What we have done is to look at the changes over time and changes in terms of spatial patterns. And changes over time, we look at both the baseline, that is what's currently stored in ecosystems, and how does that on annual variability look like. And the changes in future, we projected the land use change into 2050, and we looked at how the land use change impacted carbon storage, and also greenhouse gas fluxes all the way to 2050. What we found is that the region is, as Secretary Hayes pointed out, a major carbon sink. The current carbon stored in the region is about 7,500 million tons of carbon ecosystems. Annually, the region gains about anywhere between 20 to 99 million tons of carbon into the systems. And those amount of carbon sequestered will help offset the most of greenhouse gas emissions from the region. The greenhouse gas emissions as a result of agricultural activities and the wetlands, natural emissions from wetlands and so on. Projecting to the future, the amount of land use change is expected to increase, particularly the expansion of agricultural lands in the region is going to be significant based on the demands of agricultural goods as a result of increased population nationally and internationally. The carbon stock will increase into future all the way to 2050, and the region will remain as a carbon sink. The total carbon stock will increase anywhere between 29 to 36% from the current baseline, and the emissions of greenhouse gases such as methane and such as nitrous oxide will increase anywhere between 7 to 11%. We also found that aquatic emissions from water surfaces represent a major source of greenhouse gas emission. And this has not been counted before. And we found that the fire in the region, mostly grassland fire, is relatively, the emissions resulting from the grassland fires remain as relatively small and will remain as flat over time. So those will be the primary findings of the assessment.
Okay.
I also added that we completed this Green Plains assessment, and the next step for us will be to move on to the Western U.S. To deliver the Western U.S. assessment.
Christina Reed, Discovery News. So, am I to understand that if the land use continues as it is now, with the expected changes to be obviously increasing? I mean, I'm a little confused as to why carbon storage would increase based on land use changes. Is that, what exact land use changes do you expect to see? Less use of it or more? Or?
Well, first of all, I would like to also, I forgot, but acknowledge that this effort is a team effort. And several of our principal investigators are here, so back there. As far as why despite amount of land use activities which will increase over time, the carbon storage will also increase. Our analysis look at how climate change will impact the carbon sequestration. And currently the region continue to add more carbon to ecosystems. That trend will continue. And in fact, that if you look at our results, you will see that the climate change actually will facilitate, potentially facilitate increased carbon storage over time.
Dr. McNutt, I presume that when Congress requested this study or these studies, it was because they wanted guidance on policy changes they might envisage in the future. And I'm wondering if, based on the first study, there is anything in there that would be specifically useful to Congress, something they can do now already if they chose to, based on these results.
Well, Harvey, I think one reason why Congress may have asked USGS to do this study is USGS is not an agency that has any policy responsibilities or any management responsibilities. So I believe Congress felt that by asking USGS to do this study, they could be guaranteed a result that would be policy neutral and that would be not have any management prescriptions in it. And therefore, they would have a result that would be simply factual scientifically, and therefore Congress could then take this result, and any of the agencies that do have management responsibilities, and Congress as a group that does set policy could then decide itself what it would want to do with it. And so I think that is probably the appropriate route for this report, is to go to other groups within the federal government that do have those responsibilities. I think that actually, because this report does have the fine enough scale on it to be downscaled to the level at which counties and states can take this information and act on it, that it actually may not be actually at the federal government level that it finds its most use. It actually could be at the more local and regional level that that this report is actually the most useful because of the fact that it is downscaled.
Christina Reed again. Help me understand a little bit clearer. If you're part of the reason for the 29 to 36% increase is because of the carbon that's expected to increase in the atmosphere as well. Is that right?
We didn't analyze the specific how the exchange between the land system and atmosphere. But the projection is we actually look at how the three, we took IPCC future climate change projections, and there were three main trajectories, three out of four main trajectories. And we looked at how we projected the future land use, land cover change out to the future. And we look at how we also considered the specific climate change effects and into future. And the results of the projection show that the total carbon stored in ecosystems in the region will increase by 29 to 36%.
Okay, is there a risk, though, that this area faces based on land use or so much carbon that it will have a stopping point for its sink capabilities, or a limit to that?
Well, the data are spatial data, and if we look at our results of locally, there are areas where the systems will lose carbon. And that's number one. Number two, the projections show that over time, the rate of sequestration, the rate of taking up the carbon, storing ecosystem will decrease somewhat over time. So I hope that answered your question.
Hi, I'm Mason Inman with National Geographic News, and I'm pretty sure I've seen some estimates of the carbon sink potential in the Great Plains before, but I'm curious, how do the results in this new study compare with what had been found or had been estimated before, and if there are significant differences? Was that surprising, and how do you explain the differences between this study and what was found before?
Yes, we compared our work with some of the existing studies. I should have said that this effort is unique in that it not only considered the baseline estimates, but also the future projections. And for Great Plains, we have not seen any major projections that look at all ecosystems together. However, there are studies that look at individual ecosystems separately. And our results are similar in terms of the magnitude and the scale. For example, the Forest Service collects forest carbon, the carbon stored in forest lands. If you look at the Forest Service work compared to our work on a unit area basis, the results are quite similar for the current baseline, but there's no projection to the future. Grasslands, there have been studies using flux tars to quantify grassland carbon uptake and storage. And our results compared to such studies are also very similar. There hasn't been any major wetland studies. This is almost the first time that wetlands are considered for Great Plains. Aquatic systems, it's very much first time that we look at how carbon is transported through waterways and also emitted through water surface to the atmosphere.
And I should add that we are very grateful for the help and assistance we got from USDA. This study would not have been possible without their help, their data, their cooperation. So while USGS was the lead on this, USDA's cooperation was absolutely essential to the completion of this study.
Are there any reporters on the telephone who'd like to ask a question?
Yes.
Okay, identify yourself, please, and then go ahead. By the way, Deputy Secretary Hayes is not on the call anymore, so if you have questions for him, you can follow up with USGS later.
Yeah, my name is, can you hear me?
Yes, and please identify yourself.
Yep. Steve Davies, Endangered Species and Wetlands Report. I'm curious about the wetlands assessment and whether you were able to consider the oil boom that's going on right now in, I believe it's western North Dakota and northeast Montana, the Bakken boom, is that correct? There are a number of oil wells being drilled, and what kind of effect is that going to have on the prairie potholes and the potential for wetlands to absorb carbon in the future in the plains?
It's not clear. At least the first part isn't.
Could someone repeat the question if someone heard it?
The impact of the oil drilling in western North Dakota.
So we didn't include that in the assessment.
Okay. It would seem to be important.
I'm Steve Benka from Physics Today magazine, and I admit I'm thinking rather naively about this. I obviously haven't read the report and I don't know the details. It seems to me that the carbon that is tied up in the Great Plains is tied up in the vegetation, in various ecosystems, in various different ways. And personally, I'm looking forward to learning something about the wetlands. But that carbon is now already stored and is there. It's tied up. And so any additional carbon that comes from whatever, the hand of man, as was said, has to be dealt with somehow if we are to mitigate climate change in the long haul. I'm not real clear on the magnitude of the sequestration that this additional roughly 30% sink will provide and how that fits into the bigger picture. Now, maybe you haven't looked at that in this particular study, and so I can understand if you don't have a ready answer, but if you can give me a sense of how it fits into the big picture, I'd appreciate it. And if you can't, that's okay too.
We did not include analysis of policy options or land management options that are specific related to potential mitigations. Having said that, we believe that the results are such that it can be informational and potentially can be used to inform future analysis of such options. So all that I can say is just that, yeah, we certainly did.
But I think it's probably fair to say that we can't grow our way out of CO2 emissions by simply saying that every year we are going to add to the Great Plains biosphere in enough magnitude that we could offset CO2 emissions, okay? That's not one of the scientific options here. But this, by doing a report such as this, it does allow us to see that there are options here that are going in the right direction rather than in the wrong direction. It allows us to trade off things like grasslands, woody forests, wetlands, and agricultural lands in order to understand what is the relative importance of each one. And if you have a choice as to which you're going to do, what is the restoration value of one versus the other? And what are their long-term values, what versus their annual values, et cetera. And so it's not as though, as I say, we're going to grow in the biosphere our way out of our CO2 emissions, but it does allow us to measure these various ones and give a quantitative measure of them.
Randy Shostak, reporter with EOS, newspaper of the American Geophysical Union. Dr. McNutt, you mentioned in your opening remarks Landsat, and I wonder if you and Dr. Zhu can discuss the involvement of, the dependence on, and the relationship to Landsat for this report, and if you could also discuss the challenges that the Landsat program currently faces and how this might affect upcoming regional assessments.
Well, why don't we let Z start with the dependence of the report on it, and then I'll talk about some of the challenges.
Yes, Landsat is very much the core capability of this assessment. First of all, a fundamental data set that drives this assessment is land use change. The land use change starts with Landsat derived maps, and so we have produced national land use maps over time on an annual basis. And we also use Landsat to map fires. And we use Landsat to map forest cuts and other land use changes over time. So the Landsat data play a significant role in this assessment in addition to other data sets. The future of Landsat is the future role of Landsat data is such that we will rely on that for monitoring purposes. This assessment is based on the premise that land use change is the primary driver of carbon storage and change over time. And Landsat is at its 30-meter pixel is an ideal tool for capturing such changes and allowing us to monitor how much carbon is being added or released and in such a way.
And as for the current status and future prospects, the USGS recently turned off Landsat 5 because of a instrument failure. For those of you who know Landsat 5, it is a system that was working about 7 sigma beyond its originally designed mission lifetime, and it had been basically predicted to run out of hydrazine fuel within the year anyway, so there wasn't much chance that we were going to get more data from that mission for very much longer anyway. Landsat 7 continues to return data, though it had a line scanner failure several years ago, and through some magic of processing, we've been able to get useful data out of Landsat 7, but that right now is our only Landsat data which is being returned to us at the moment. Landsat 8 should be on the launch pad in early 2013 with a nominal 5-year mission lifetime, and that is the last we've got in the queue. There's nothing planned beyond Landsat 8 that we have currently funded. USGS continues to work with NASA and with the administration and Congress to try to come up with funding for future Landsat missions, but so far we have nothing in our budget beyond Landsat 8.
Okay, that's all the time we have. Thank you very much for presenting about this new report, and thank you all for being here. Our next press conference is going to be at 5 o'clock, and that one is about Vesta, Dawn's new view of asteroid Vesta.